You're listening to Autumn on the Air, the weekly podcast that brings you conversations about the impact of research commercialization and the people who make it happen. Join us for interviews with patent and licensing professionals, innovators, entrepreneurs, and tech transfer leaders on the issues and trends that matter most. Keep listening for an inside track on the people, IP policies, and politics changing our world.
Welcome to another episode of Autumn on the Air. Today we have a fascinating discussion lined up for you. Storytelling is often seen as a soft skill, but in the world of technology transfer and startups, it's anything but. In today's episode, we are diving deep into the importance of storytelling, what it is, and its importance in helping tech transfer offices to efficiently translate university research into successful products and services that have high value impact on the world. Whether you're pitching to investors, partnering with industry, or seeking to highlight the groundbreaking work at your university, storytelling can be your most powerful tool. Today, I'm joined by Otto Pohl, a startup communications strategist with Core Communications. Otto is a former journalist who has been published in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Men's Journal, and New York Magazine, just to name a few. In addition, Otto is a four-time founder and has been the head of communications for several startups. Combining his passion of storytelling with entrepreneurship, Otto works with university tech transfer offices and their affiliated startups to make the most efficient transition from research to success. Welcome, Otto. I'm super excited to have you on the podcast today.
Excited to be here.
Great. Well, I wanted to start off the podcast today, Otto, by asking you about your amazing career journey. It's had a lot of twists and turns, something I know you refer to as career rewrites. Tell us how you've gotten to where you are today.
Yeah. My career has had a lot of chapters, and you have to kind of look at it from a certain lens to have it all make sense. But it really fits into two big buckets. There was the sort of journalism/adventure bucket, and then there was the business bucket and entrepreneurship bucket. And maybe it took me too long to figure out that those fit together actually really nicely, and they fit all into one bucket. But here's how it went. I graduated from college and I moved to Russia to work as a photojournalist, which was amazing. This is the early 90s. Gorbachev had just dissolved the Soviet Union. Suddenly there were 15 new countries that we could all visit and explore. I became the New York Times bureau photographer and traveled to almost all of these countries over the years, worked with a whole bunch of the New York Times photojournal foreign correspondents, which was an amazing time. And I really, an amazing education. And I highly recommend journalism as an early stage career thing for everybody. But there's also all these business opportunities that were happening. And so I quit the Times to focus on these business opportunities, co-founded 3 businesses in Moscow. And then I ultimately sold those and then moved back to the States, ended up in Silicon Valley at the tail end of the first internet boom, doing business development. Then kind of got bored of that and moved to Spain and then Kenya as a journalist. Again, then got a journalism Fulbright for Germany, moved to Germany. And through that, I met the Germany's largest magazine publisher. I was actually at an internship at one of those publications there, and then met the CEO who sent me to Ukraine, to Kiev, to launch the local office of this magazine publishing, this Bertelsmann magazine publisher. And so then I went back to the States. I got married, went to business school. I figured that would be a good idea. Did another startup. So it was always this sort of back and forth between, journalism because it's exciting, business because it seems like it's a great opportunity. And then I realized, wait a minute, stories and business really are one and the same thing, or they certainly need each other. And it really, it comes down to this idea that we as a species, our brain requires things to make sense. And the way we make sense of things is that we think of them in terms of stories, right? Just like the cavemen looking at the night sky. And they don't see random twinkling lights, but they see bears and warriors, and they make stories about them. And it makes the night sky understandable. And exactly the same way business is made understandable by telling the story about why it matters and what's so important about it. And often you have these sort of random pieces that have to fit together. There's this great scene in Apollo 13, the movie, if any of you saw it, right? There's carbon dioxide building up in the space capsule, and back down in Houston, they're panicked about this. And so they dump all this sort of random jumble of stuff onto a table where they're like, we have to assemble a carbon dioxide filter out of this whole mess for everyone up there to survive. and they think about it and they figure it out, and boy, they're able to make that work. And this sort of the same thing that startups have. They have this, and maybe my job career has, right? Like you have this jumble of stuff, and it's our job as communicators to turn that into this sort of beautiful narrative that clears the air and lets us breathe and accomplish our mission, and have this world make sense around us.
No, that's a really great way to segue into storytelling, which you're very passionate about and you're very good at it. And, you mentioned storytelling as a way for us to make sense out of things. And I think that's a really great way to describe it, because I think a lot of people think that storytelling is something you do with kids or you do with your family or your friends around a campfire. So tell us, a little bit more about what storytelling is. I think it's one of those terms that we think we all know what it means, but really maybe we don't. And, you mentioned caveman, but really, how did it originate?
Yep. No, it's a great question. And I really don't like the word storytelling that much either. I've never found a better one, because exactly it feels so fluffy and read the kids to sleep type thing.
Exactly.
And it really is, it's so much deeper and bigger and more intertwined with everything that we do in life, and certainly with the modern world that we've created, that it's something that we really need to spend time on. And maybe some listener will come up with a better term for it, and that'd be fabulous. We want to see explicit connections between events, and that's really the sort of fundamental thing. And then obviously a larger story is just a bunch of interconnected events. Like for example, last month I broke my shoulder mountain biking, and you could just say like, well, I went biking and I was a little bit dumb or slipped off the trail and boom, I broke my shoulder, end of story. But we all want it to. And in fact, a lot of the conversations I had with other people, immediately they're like, oh, maybe that's the world telling you to slow down, or maybe that's like, maybe this will create some kind of an opportunity, or maybe this is the best thing that ever happened to you, right? Like we all want things. We don't just want to have a fact and be like, oh yeah, there's this thing, end of story. We want it to be a story. And so we want it to make, we want that to have meaning. We want our life to have meaning. We want everything around us to have meaning. And that is one of those things that in a business perspective, then that is what we need to make sure is that our company has meaning. People understand why you're doing this. And so that part is like, I think is pretty intuitive. I did not realize until I recently read a book called Sapiens by a researcher named Yuval Noah Harari that really opened my eyes to just how fundamental the entire concept of stories are to the success of the human race. In fact, this is what allowed us to become the dominant species on this planet, is the fact that we can tell stories to each other and all follow along with them, right? So you'll have wolves or whatever, dogs or something chasing something, right? You can have obviously species and animals working together to solve a problem and hunt or whatever, but you'll never have wolves coming up with some, organizing themselves in a larger fashion where you can have hundreds or thousands of wolves operating together to achieve some goal. And it appears that the Homo sapiens ability to do just that is what actually made us conquer all of the other animals, as well as all of the other Homo, like the Neanderthals and whatever species, that we were able to coordinate hundreds and thousands of people together and allow us to attack in very fancy ways and to organize our societies in a way that that allowed us to succeed. And in fact, when you think about it now, and as Harari describes, and he calls them sort of fictions, is that virtually everything in modern life is essentially a fiction that we've all agreed to tell ourselves and agree on. So things like, national borders or money or business or honestly, religion, all of these things don't have any physical aspect, right? It's nothing your dog could go and sniff, but it is something that we've all agreed to agree on. And so now we suddenly have this thing, and it's become so real that a concept like patriotism or nationalism or the like, they feel so part of our life that we can't even imagine that they're actually completely fictional, and that they're just stories that these interpersonal fictions, as Harari calls them, that they are really just that. And so when we go and create a business, like what is Microsoft? It's something we've all agreed is a thing, and we all work with that, but it's not actually There's nothing physical, there's nothing real about it. In the end, it's just one big story. There's this parable by this guy, this awesome writer, David Foster Wallace, that he told at a graduation speech a few years ago, which I've always thought of, which is fabulous. And he says, as a parable of the older fish swims past two younger fish, and he says, and the older fish says, "Hey, how's the water today?" And one of the younger fish turns to the other one and says, "What's water?" And I think that really, in ways, stories are like that. We're so suffused with them and surrounded by them that we think they've taken on the physicality that they just don't have. And they are what makes us successful as a species.
Yeah, that's really amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to dive a little bit deeper into storytelling and the startup context, because I think there is a sense that storytelling and what we call pitching, when you're talking about startups, are considered by many to be nothing more than hype. And I wonder, where's the line between vision and delusion? And really what I'm thinking of, let's go back to the very famous case of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. And, where's the point that storytelling can get you into trouble, Otto?
Yep. Well, it's a great question. And the fact is that to some degree, vision and delusion, they have no difference, I guess, when they're spoken. If later we find out, like if they were visionary, if they make it happen, or if they were delusional because it didn't happen. But I think that the cases of Holmes really calls into question or makes us doubt things that we shouldn't be doubting, right? The idea of a pitch, we call it a pitch. It's because the reason everything you're saying about a founder starting a company hasn't happened yet. And it won't happen until they make it happen. And so if you just talked about things that already existed, that we would call them descriptions. And so we're pitching something because we think we could make this happen, and it hasn't happened yet, but we're confident it will. And here's the impact it'll have. And there's nothing true about, in this sense, quote unquote, lying about the future. And if you lie, quote unquote, lie really well about the future and then go proceed to make it happen, you're a visionary. You founded Tesla, and everyone thinks that you're so amazing. And so that's the story about the future. So I think it's important to think about the future and pitching as something that's good. The really clear distinction that we do need to make, and I'm in no way excusing lying or what Elizabeth Holmes did or anything else, but there's a very clear line. Sort of, quote, lying about the future and pitching is vision. Lying about the present or the past, that's fraud. And so when she was saying, "Hey, I'm going to build this machine that's going to do all these incredible things with one drop of blood," right, that's a pitch, and you can believe it or you can not believe it. But when she says, "We already have these partnerships with Walgreens," or whatever it was, "we already have this machine that's doing all these things, and we have all this revenue," right? That's called fraud. And I think that someone like her is. I think she probably didn't start out thinking she was going to be in that position. I think she just got caught up, got way out over her skill. And arguably she was just too good at storytelling, and the storytelling just simply didn't match up to the reality that she was then creating. For tech transfer professionals, so what you really need to do is you need to figure out what your technology can do that's in your portfolio. And you want to make sure that this molecule that you have or this process that's been invented, that there is a story about how that thing is going to change the world. But you need to make sure that you're not doing it in a way that obviously you don't feel will end up panning out. And no one's expecting everything to pan out. Companies fail all the time. In fact, most of them fail, but we don't think of them as liars per se. We just think of them as, well, it's just really hard to do what you do.
Absolutely. So based on all your experience, Otto, what do you think good storytellers do well?
So there's a few things. And I think that the most important fundamental thing is that founders, especially university-sourced IP, tends to be very fact-based. And there's multiple reasons for that fact-based thing. One of them is that's the academic mindset, and maybe we can get into that a little bit later. But the other thing is that we just love to talk about the what. We've invented this new molecule or this process or this whatever it is, and we want to tell you all the facts about what it is. But really, what you need to spin and talk about is that the world doesn't care about your invention. They care about their own problems. And so what you need to focus on is the why. Why is what you did so important? Why is what you did solving the problems? And why is what you're doing making the world a better place? Now, obviously, all of that's going to be backed up by by the facts of your invention, and the more amazing your invention is, the bolder the claims you can be. But you really need to talk about that why. I came up with a pyramid that I use to describe this, where the base of that pyramid are those what's, and that's the fact it's better, it's faster, it's cheaper, et cetera. And then the first level of why up from that is, okay, so what does that let you do? How does that let you do your sort of job better? How does that let the company make more money, et cetera? And then the next layer up from that is, well, okay, well, why does that matter? Well, why is now I've got larger benefits. Maybe it advances careers. It helps us discover drugs more quickly. It's going to help cure this form of cancer. It's going to do all these things, right? That's why we're doing all those other things. And then above that, there's that final thing is, well, what's the big benefit to society? How are we going to build a better world? This is going to mean lower healthcare costs. Is it going to mean the peace? Is this going to mean financial inclusion? Is this going to mean cleaner water? Whatever it is that multi-layer of why is really important to keep in mind. And as you tell those stories, a good storyteller, to your question, is one who knows kind of like which level of why they want to address for the audience at hand.
Now, that pyramid you refer to that as the Pohl pyramid, don't you?
Correct.
Yeah. No, that's a very, very helpful way of looking at it. And so, Otto, continuing on this theme of good storytelling, why do you think tech transfer professionals should care about storytelling?
I think tech transfer professionals should care about storytelling because it's going to help them do a better job and it's going to help them make a greater impact. Universities are obviously impacting this and changing the lives of their students, but I think that tech transfer offices is where a university can change the world. I think the tech transfer office is arguably the most important office on campus, because it's taking all that millions and billions of dollars of research that's being done, and it's actually where the rubber meets the road and where the world has changed as a result of all that work taking place. And so explaining it better will help sell it better. No one's going to beat a path to the door of the inventor or the university because this better mousetrap was invented. You need to go out and, again, using the Pohl pyramid as a sort of maybe as a guide, and start thinking about how you can talk about that why to the outside world. The bottom layer is just the facts of what you've done and what your engineering breakthrough sort of represents. But then it's like, okay, so well, then what does that mean? Well, how is that going to help the world? How is that? And then if that is going to improve certain lives, well, what is that going to mean? That's going to mean, again, better drugs and a better life and the like. And that's going to mean a better world. And you always need to think about how you're going to frame the benefits of the invention that you've had and shape that and mold that into the problems that your audience is experiencing at that point. And improving how it's going to improve their life. So in a way, you could even use the Pohl pyramid to discuss the benefits that storytelling will provide to tech transfer professionals, right? Because what this is going to mean at the base level, if you tell these stories well, you're going to accelerate the transition from disclosure to a deal. And what's that going to mean? Well, that's going to mean that you're going to have higher, you're going to be better in the hierarchy of your university, right? You're going to get more headcount for your office. And then what's that going to mean is, well, that's going to mean that your university can help improve the world more, and you're going to have eradicated diseases and longer lives and better technologies and the like. So shining that spotlight on your inventions allows that sort of cascade or that pyramid of benefits to really unfold. And that's why I think it's so crucial for every tech transfer professional to realize that they're in the storytelling business.
So, Otto, you have had a lot of experience with startups. You've been the director of communications for a number of them. I think it would be helpful for our audience if you could share some examples of situations where good storytelling helped an early stage startup maybe achieve a result that perhaps it wouldn't have without the storytelling.
Totally. Let me give you a couple examples, and I'll focus on ones that are literally from university tech transfer offices to make it nice and relevant. So I was working with a startup recently that does long read genetic sequencing, and the founder told me all about it, and he told me about this technology that that he uses to enable not just tens or hundreds or thousands of base pairs being measured, but hundreds of thousands. And I guess that was sort of technologically incredible. But when I asked him, like, so why that matters, he was oddly stumped, and he couldn't immediately list to me what diseases we were going to solve, what better food we were going to get, or whatever it was going to be. That, like, fact that I could imagine on an intuitive level that hundreds of thousands of base pairs being measured in off a piece of DNA would be valuable, but I didn't know why. And he had good answers for me later. Obviously, it's not that he couldn't have an answer for that, but he didn't have an immediate answer to that. And I felt that was, that's what I wanted to really hone in on. So we worked on that to really figure out not only, great, so like, what does this mean? Okay, which are the diseases how are we going to avoid the next pandemic as a result? Why is it so good for agriculture? And there's reasons for that. But then also there was another component of taking this technology, which was essentially the sample prep for this genetic sequencing, which he was revolutionizing, but realizing that was arguably the missing third. It was the missing piece of the full genetic sequencing revolution. We've already all seen the genetic sequencing revolution that we had as a result of technology, of these computers that can do this, CRISPR and the like. We have these huge databases now, so that's the processing part. But what we haven't really improved upon is the wet lab processing, allowing longer strands to be fed into the system. And so framing it not only in terms of the results that we're going to come out of, but framing it in terms of like how it's really the missing piece that's really going to unlock the next several orders of magnitude improvement in genetic sequencing. Suddenly that becomes a story, and suddenly that became something that they were able to sort of tell to investors, and they quickly closed their seed round, and they're well on their way. So that was, I think, a really nice example of framing that in a more important way. There's another company I worked with recently, in fact, still am working with. They capture carbon dioxide from the air. They process it with industrial waste like steel slag and coal fly ash. And they turn that into carbon dioxide. They turn that carbon dioxide into something solid and that they can sell, things like calcium carbonate. And I know certainly me on a personal level, I'm just praying for these people to be really big and successful.
Let's hope so. Yeah, fingers crossed.
Because the idea that you could capture all this carbon dioxide and then simultaneously capture it with another waste that's sort of polluting the environment and turn that into something positive, I think is really incredible. But the story was complex, and it was all this, very, hardcore chemistry. And then they can also run this thing run the whole process off of industrial waste heat. And then they can also capture the nickel and cobalt and platinum and all the stuff that's in the steel slag in very low quantities. They can actually recapture that as they're making things like calcium carbonate and calcium magnesium. So it's really awesome, but it was also complex, and we needed to sort of simplify that down to something that we could tell more quickly than sort of telling all these like little individual sort of benefits of. And we landed on this idea of waste being value in the wrong place. This idea that, again, there's nothing wrong with carbon dioxide. We just can't have trillions of tons of it floating around the air. There's nothing wrong with, platinum and nickel and cobalt. We just can't have it polluting the rivers, et cetera. So this idea that you've got a company that can suddenly essentially close the loop on all of these industrial processes that have metastasized into these extraordinarily large sort of volumes and are sort of polluting everything around us, means that we need to do some work to sort of restore order, if you will, to the planet. And so helping to bring it down like that, I think has really helped their story. It's helped their investing. It's helped their story when they go to industry partners, and they're doing great. And they're now, I think they're launching with the United States' largest steel company. They're setting up a plant there at one of the factories there. So that really helped them. And then let me give you one more example. So there was a company that can visualize the interactions between pharmaceuticals and the human digestive tract. So this is, again, something that's incredible. Generally, right now, the problem is we take a drug orally, and then we basically watch to see what the patient does, or if it has an impact, if they start shaking or get healthy or whatever it is. And we really don't know anything or very little about what happens in between. And this idea of being able to visualize it, again, has some intuitive appeal. But what where I worked on that, and sort of one of the things we focused on was coming up with an analogy that helped make that clear, what it was like, the current version, as to what the new world is like with using this technology. And the story that I came up with is that, imagine you're a policeman in a big city and a call comes in and you're told, oh my God, there's a crime happening, in Lower Manhattan. And so essentially what the current process is they take all of Lower Manhattan, stuff it into a blender, run it through a blender, and then test the resulting slurry for sort of indications of increased criminality. And then if you find that, all you can really say is, like, I guess somewhere in Lower Manhattan, there was a crime going on because we see the following sort of metric change. Now, that's how currently drug biome interactions are essentially measured. And now you have some information about, there was some inflation or whatever took place, but it's obviously pretty inaccurate. Now imagine what this new technology does. You're that same police cop. You're photographing, the call comes in, you photographed as take an X-ray image of all of Lower Manhattan, and you can pinpoint with an arrow pointing to exactly the building and the floor where the crime is taking place. Like, that's the difference between what this company can do for detecting the drug biome interactions versus the current. And I think that what made it really clear, it really helped sharpen the pitch deck. We kind of built the pitch deck around that. They quickly raised over $20 million, and they're, again, well on their way. One thing I want to emphasize is that, obviously, the story doesn't make the companies great, and I certainly can't remotely claim to have created all the value that and success that these people are and these companies are now having. But I do think that it can enable it. It's like you take a diamond, and a diamond is awesome even when it comes out of the ground, but when you cut and polish it, suddenly it's something the queen wants to buy.
Yeah, those were some great examples. Thank you for sharing those. And, that leads me to wonder, Otto, we've been talking about storytelling generically, but how does it differ when you're communicating with different stakeholders, whether it's investors, potential customers, or maybe even academic partners?
One of the differences between academic storytelling or the communication method and the business one is that a business one pretty much always needs to have a point, right? There's a goal. You don't want to have just someone come visit your website and say, oh, that was nice. You want them to do something as a result, somehow move down the conversion funnel. And the idea with these different stakeholders is that they all have a different conversion funnel, right? And so they have a different thing that you need to tell them and a different story that's going to get them to that next level. Investors, obviously, at the end of the day, the entire point of hearing that story is that, wow, I believe that if I give this person $1, they're going to send me back $100, right? The real story that you're telling is that, wow, you're going to help me multiply the money. And everything else around the facts of the business is really just a means to convincing you that, in fact, wow, that dollar really is going to turn into $100. And so the goal needs to be really kept in mind so that you can make sure that you're solving whatever issues and problems and objections that audience has can be resolved so that you can get to the goal that you want with them, which in this case is investment. Potential customers obviously is a different one, that they don't have the money-making problem, if you will. They have their own whatever set of problems it is, and your product is solving that. So now you need to present your product in a way that makes them feel that, wow, their problem is going to get solved by using this product, and here's how great it is, and et cetera. And the same thing for any other. If you're trying to convince someone to join the company, let's say you're trying to get an employee and you really think this person's fabulous and you want them to get to join, well, you need to present the story of your company in a way that's going to make them feel that, wow, this is a place that I'm going to be challenged, I'm going to be fulfilled, I'm going to be working with fabulous people. And again, the story of what you're doing and what you're building is a key plank of that, but you need to make sure that you frame it in a way that their goals are being met. So I think the really important thing is that storytelling in a business concept, you always kind of need to work from the result backwards. The result being whatever it is, you need to be very clear on what the sort of conversion and success is. And then you work backwards to frame the story and everything you show these people in a way that is going to help them get to that point.
Now, you work with a lot of universities, and I'm curious, what are some of the common mistakes you see tech transfer offices or maybe early stage startups making when it comes to storytelling? And, if you could, what would you tell them to work on?
The biggest issue, if I had to come up with a single biggest issue, is that the academic communication mindset is fundamentally different and not entirely compatible with the business communication mindset. So when academics are speaking about their research, they have a very established mode of doing so, and it's fabulous in a scientific concept, right? They talk about the perimeter of their knowledge. They talk about the unanswered questions. They sort of present the detail and the facts, and they let the audience draw its own conclusions, right? Those are all really good approaches for the scientific method. But when you're trying to go out and convince people, and as I was saying earlier, the goal of speaking to an audience, communications doesn't get you any points. Business results get you points, and business results mean some kind of a conversion. And the way that you're going to convert those external audiences from being uninterested or disinterested people to being sort of proponents and customers of your product is that you need to explain them in a way that gets them there. And so that might mean leaving out detail. It might mean projecting certainty. It might mean talking about things that haven't happened yet, that maybe the scientist is like, well, we haven't done that yet, but you're like, I think we can, and we can get there. And here's how the world's going to be a different place. And so it feels, from someone steeped in the academic mindset, I think it feels like a little bit of a used car salesman, because you're again sort of leaving out lots of things that make you feel uncomfortable. You're talking about the future in a way that makes things seem more certain than they are. But I think the way to think about it is, and to make you hopefully feel more comfortable about it, is that you have to think about it as two different approaches. It's just like you have two different outfits for two different occasions, right? You put on the tuxedo for the state dinner, you put on the bathing suit to go to the beach, and those are all perfectly fine, and everyone thinks those are perfectly reasonable and the right. If you flip them, it would be really weird. And so I don't want you guys showing up in a business setting, wearing your bathing suit. I think that, and you need to put on the business communications mindset. And if you talk about in that way, you're going to have a lot more success. And that's everything from the founders of the company to the tech transfer offices to anyone who's coming from that academic mindset.
And with the rapid advancement of technology, how do you think tech transfer offices can keep their storytelling relevant as well as up to date, given how fast everything is moving in this day and age?
The good news about storytelling and things is that it's somewhat unaffected by the advancements. In a way, storytelling is still essentially a caveman's exercise. It's still satisfying fundamental human needs and the like. So there's no real change to the fundamental components of storytelling. Movies still fundamentally are telling the exact same story. If you look at a movie from 1930 and compare it to one that was made yesterday, fundamentally the storytelling thing hasn't changed. What obviously changes are a lot of the ways in which we tell that story. Obviously, things like we have new expectations for what videos look like. Certainly, even the concept of videos, the quality keeps improving. We might want to bring in digital things. The changes from social media has changed attention spans and expectations about, what should the video be vertical or horizontal. 10 years ago, nobody would have ever made a vertical video, and now that's relatively standard, right? We've all sort of come to accept them. We don't think about them as anything odd. So the mechanics of it and where you do it, are you a company that should be promoting on TikTok or LinkedIn and those channels, that all changes. But the great news is that on a fundamental basis, telling the why and explaining the world to people in a way that makes intuitive and emotional sense is something that I don't think is ever going to change.
And I would just ask you further about these visuals and multimedia elements that you mentioned, because, they've really advanced in the last couple of years. And, what role do you see those types of things playing in effective storytelling for tech transfer offices?
The technology is absolutely advancing. Video is an amazing tool. It obviously can reach people in ways that text can't do. And to some degree, it's the bar keeps getting higher in the sense that we come to expect higher quality videos and output. On the other hand, the tools that we are given keep also getting more advanced. So I think that they're all sort of powerful, and you need to stay up to date and look at them. But I also don't want anyone to think that, oh, I can't do something really fancy, so therefore I'm not going to do anything at all. I still think that if you have a powerful sort of narrative change and you're able to capture it in a clear way, you're telling a story in a way that's going to get whatever audience you're speaking to move down the conversion funnel to being excited about the project or the company that or the technology that you're promoting. I think that's really the first and foremost thing. I often think there's sort of people who get really lost in the weeds. For me, my example I always go to is like, you don't train for the Tour de France by shaving your legs, right? Like that's sort of the last thing you do. You prepare for the Tour de France by like working out an awful lot and riding thousands of miles. And right at the end, if you want to get that last little thing, like that's when you shave your legs and, to get that last bit of aerodynamic streamlining, right? But like, don't worry about that part yet. And so I think the real fundamental, the real workout component that we're talking about here is something that is tried and true, and then we can get to the sort of finer points of presentation and channels and the like. We can have that discussion, but we have it second.
So Otto, as the podcast comes to a close, what are 3 things that you hope our tech transfer professionals take away today about storytelling?
So I think the first is just accepting storytelling. And as I guess we talked earlier, like maybe we can come up with a better word, but at least in the meantime, don't sort of take it as frippery. Like actually spend the next hour in your life thinking about everything that you interact with around you and wondering whether it's something really truly physical or whether it's a story that we're being told and essentially a fiction that we've all agreed to agree on. So see the world as a world of stories. And that is true even for all of the technologies that are in your portfolio. So it is not it's not something that you should think of as a something that comes at the end or, oh yeah, that's something that we need to do like when we're done with everything else. It is integral to everything and every technology that you're developing and honestly, the whole world that we're all living in. So build an appreciation for that. The second is I would encourage you to also shift from the products that are in your portfolio of tech transfer technologies and think about the impact that those could have on the world around you, and always think about the customer results and the outputs, whether that customer is a deep tech biolab or whether that customer is someone sort of dying from some horrible disease or it's the doctor or it's whatever, it's a semiconductor manufacturer. Think about the world from their perspective and then see how your inventions fit into that and help them improve their lives. So really getting away from the what and really getting into the how and the why of what you're doing. And then the third, and this is sort of ties maybe the two together, is this idea of embracing the idea that business communication with its seeming sort of superficiality or confidence in the lack of facts or however you want to frame it, that business communication is an important and meaningful and correct approach in certain environments. And that environment includes startups and business and the process of taking that academics to the world. And so the tech transfer office really sits at that intersection between the academic mindset and the business mindset. So I think that tech transfer professionals need to really be fluent in both of those things and have an appreciation for when is the right time to put on which outfit. And if you do so, I think you're going to be a lot more successful.
Otto, if I'm not mistaken, I believe you have a newsletter that shares a lot of your thinking that we talked about today, correct?
That's right. I do it about once a week, and I invite anyone to sign up at ottopohl.com.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, Otto, this has been a really fascinating discussion today. And thank you so much for sharing your insights on storytelling and its intersection with entrepreneurship. It's really been a delight having you on the podcast.
Thank you so much. It was really fun.
That brings us to the end of today's episode of Autumn on the Air. Otto, thank you so much for sharing your expertise on storytelling and its pivotal role in tech transfer. Your insights on the Pohl pyramid and the power tools of storytelling are invaluable, and I'm sure our listeners will take a lot away from today's conversation. Don't forget to join Otto for his upcoming autumn webinar, Promote Your TTO More Effectively, on August 13th, 2024 at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where he'll delve even deeper into these topics. Until next time, keep innovating and telling your stories.
Thanks for listening to Autumn on the Air with Lisa Mueller. Get social with us and share your thoughts. You can tweet us at AUTM or visit us online at autm.net. We'll be back next week on the air. Be sure to join us.